John, thank you very much. This is Saturday with Claire Byrne, and we'd like to hear from you over the course of the next hour. If you'd like to get in touch, you can text us. 51551 is the number. You can email saturday@rte.ie, and on Twitter it's @SaturdayRTE. Joining us on the programme today from our Cork studio, we have Ciarán Lynch from the Labour Party and outgoing TD for Cork South Central. And joining Ciarán in Cork is Darragh Murphy, who's Acting Minister for European Affairs and Fine Gael TD for Cork North Central. Here in our Dublin studio, Stephen Donnelly, Social Democrats TD for Wicklow and East Carlow. John Lahart, Fianna Fáil TD for Dublin South West. Dan O'Brien, who's columnist with the Sunday Independent and Chief Economist at the Institute of International and European Affairs. And Brian Dowling is here as well from our own political staff. You're all very welcome. Thank you for being with us on this Bank Holiday Saturday. Brian, I'm going to start with you. What's going on?
Well, as we know, last night Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael concluded their end of the process by reaching agreement on a deal that would effectively facilitate the creation of a Fine Gael minority government. The next phase is now for the acting Taoiseach Enda Kenny to get at least 6 independent TDs on board, working from the basis of he had 52 votes on the last vote for Taoiseach, so he needs to get to a minimum of 58. Ideally, every one above that would give you an extra level of comfort. If it's the bare 58, it means he has a working majority of 2. That's assuming Fianna Fáil abstain on some critical votes. So you can see why ideally you'd want to be having 60 or 61.
To give you a cushion.
To give you a little bit of a cushion.
Because we called a good few of the independents this morning, and they all told us that they were doing their own thing. And I was saying to Marion earlier on that Michael Fitzmaurice was on the bog. Are there talks happening this weekend? Or?
I don't think there's as of now, there's no formal face-to-face talks taking place today, and I don't think tomorrow. But I think that you can expect that there will be contacts continuing all the time. There will be phone calls, there'll probably be emails, exchanges of documents, and walking through. The Independents meet at 10. The Independent Alliance meets at 10 o'clock on Monday morning, and they will then begin the process of walking through the detail of the broad document they have already agreed with Fine Gael, roughly 120 pages. A fair amount of that groundwork has been completed, but they still have to work out some of the details of this. The 5 rural TDs will also meet on Monday as well. Whether all of this...
There'll be competition between these two camps, right? Do you think?
An element of that, perhaps, although a lot of their interests do overlap. Whether all of this can be completed in time for a vote for Taoiseach on Wednesday, it'll be very tight to make Wednesday. My understanding is Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil both had a standby plan for their parliamentary parties to meet possibly on Monday to approve the document that has been agreed. The impression I get is that that's now more likely to be Tuesday. It's not definite, but I think more than likely Tuesday.
Yeah, maybe Darragh and John could fill us in on that. Darragh, what's the plan for the parliamentary party meeting for Fine Gael?
Well, there isn't a concrete plan exactly yet as to whether it would be Monday or Tuesday, but certainly it will be early next week. I know that the deal between Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil was concluded last night, and now the process, I suppose, of drafting and physically writing that deal to be put to both parliamentary parties is taking place. I believe discussions last night with the independents were very constructive, and I'm sure there will be ongoing discussions over the weekend. At this stage, I mean, it has been, as you say, 9 weeks. That appears very long, but in a European context, it's not exceptionally long.
It is a long time. It's a long time.
But I suppose, Claire, to be fair, now having had so much work put in by independents, by Fianna Fáil and by Fine Gael, to arrive at this point, I hope it will be concluded next week. But at this stage, I don't think that there's a requirement to put a deadline or overly rush it either.
John, what about Fianna Fáil?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much the same position. There's drafting, I understand, has to be done, has to be undertaken, and we're looking at. My word is this morning we're looking at Monday, possibly Tuesday, before it's put before the parliamentary party. Obviously, from the start of the process, in fairness, Micheál Martin, almost from the first day of the Dáil, has met with each TD. Newly elected and existing TDs in the party on a continual basis. He met all of us individually, and that's enabled him to be, I suppose, very tight on where the TDs from around the country stood on particular issues. And then obviously with the I think 3 or 4 parliamentary party meetings we've had in that time as well, we've been kept briefed. Obviously, there's been...
So there won't be a problem now. When this deal comes before you on Monday, the Parliamentary Party, you're saying that everybody's pretty much aware of what's in there.
No, we're not aware of the detail, but I think we have obviously huge trust in a pretty capable negotiating team who've acquitted themselves, I think, exceptionally over the last 6 or 8 weeks. They've kept us in touch with the broad brushstrokes, but not with the detail. So we're obviously anxious to see the detail as well when it comes to before us on Monday.
So the parliamentary parties on both sides are likely to agree to what has been done between the negotiating teams, Brian. The spanner in the works might come from the independents if there's a conflict with what they're demanding.
The difficulty will be in trying to get a minimum of 6 independents to begin with. And if you take the Independent Alliance of 6 TDs, and that's Shane Ross, Finian McGrath, Kevin Boxamore, Sean Canny, John Halligan and Michael Fitzmaurice, of the 6, I think the biggest question marks surround John Halligan and Michael Fitzmaurice as to whether or not they might be part of a deal. The 6 have said they want to go as a group, preferably. Although my understanding is, I think that Fitzmaurice and Halligan wouldn't have a great difficulty if they found that there wasn't enough in a deal for them if their 4 colleagues went and supported it. But ideally they want to stick together. I think Shane Ross was making that point again last night. John Halligan has particular difficulties around Waterford Hospital, which he sees as a regional issue, not so much a constituency issue. And there are other issues, I think, on the rural front for Michael Fitzmaurice. Then you have the 5 rural TDs. Again, there is an overlap of interests and concerns. It's trying to, of the 5 rurals, Matty McGrath looks the most unlikely to begin with to support a Fine Gael government. Then you have, of those, if Dennis Naughton, Michael Harty, Noel Grealish and Michael Collins, some of them might, some of them might not. He already has Catherine Zappone as an independent. Michael Lowry voted the last time. Maureen O'Sullivan is still potentially there. The 2 Healy-Rays, Danny and Michael Healy-Ray, I think a lot of people think it's unlikely at the end of the day that they will support and go into a government or support a government. So he needs to get a minimum of 6. I think it's going to be a challenge to reach 6. People in Fine Gael believe they can do it, that they can get the numbers. But my understanding of the Fianna Fáil position in all of this is that the agreement that has been reached is conditional upon Enda Kenny getting to 58. In other words, this is a facilitation agreement, and Fianna
Fáil, but only if he reaches that magic number.
Fianna Fáil will not, if you like, formally sign off and agree to support the government unless Enda Kenny can first show that he does have a minimum of 58. So in other words,
you know
6 have to declare publicly in advance of the vote that they are voting for Enda Kenny as Taoiseach.
If you're an independent, you are in a great position right now, aren't you?
You're in an incredibly strong position. But you have to be very careful how you play that position. It's certainly possible, if you're an independent, to make considerable headway on the agenda that you have. I think a difficulty might be for independents, and anybody who has served in government has had this experience. You can have the best ambitions and the best aspirations of what you want to achieve. When you get into government, most people find that the process of implementation can be incredibly slow sometimes. And if you're looking at a deal that has a time limit of at least 3 years on it, you may not see the pace of progress even over a couple of months that you might want, and that might become potentially frustrating for people in government for the first time. And also,
independents generally run on anti-establishment tickets. There's a reason why they are independent, and if you sign up and go in, you're rejecting all of that in one way, or it might be perceived that that's what you're doing if you go inside the tent.
You could certainly make that point, and if you look at, say, the way we've conducted politics over the last number of decades, that would be certainly true. If we are moving into this kind of European type model, we might be moving away from that kind of politics. I think a lot remains to be seen, and I think the likelihood is that Enda Kenny will get 6, but I wouldn't bet my life entirely on it that he actually will get them. I think there's more momentum towards getting them now than there was a week ago. But you don't have them till you have them, and I think there's still a bit of road to go.
Yeah, I think one of the things you were saying, that the 8 weeks or 9 weeks now, it has taken so long. Forgive me, as I said to you, Claire, a bit of a head cold, so forgive the throaty voice. International experience, as Dara said, on average it takes about 8 weeks to set up a minority government.
Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael only started talking to each other 3 weeks ago.
But this is really new territory.
That's the hold-up. All the shadow boxing for 6 weeks.
It's really new territory.
That was the
I think one of the there was no shadow boxing. I mean, we can go back to the start if you want, but I think one of the most significant points that was made last night in the contributions by the spokespeople for the various parties was by Michael McGrath, that I think he's implying that there's a template there for minority governments for the future. Now, if nothing else had come out of it, if we can work through this, that's a vital point. That if election results in the future throw up results like this again, this part of it won't have to be gone through again, and that's a pretty essential piece of government architecture.
I think, Claire,
parliamentary architecture.
If I could just come in there,
yeah.
I think, Claire, it's also important to acknowledge that this process in itself has been very positive, and it has had engagement before government formation from quite a broad group of people who've been elected with different mandates. But I think the lesson we can also take is there has been a very strong concentration on areas where we're in agreement, and whether that's with Fianna Fáil or indeed with the Independent Alliance or the rural TDs, and certainly from our own parliamentary party in Fine Gael, very, very strong support to do more for rural communities and for working families. And I think that we do have to acknowledge now over the next number of days that the independents who have engaged so strongly, who wanted the two big parties to go away and do a deal, they are now entitled to sit down and go through in a measured way, as they have done so far, what these proposals are specifically.
They're shopping lists.
Well, they're not shopping lists, no, and I think this is where politics in Ireland will have to change. I think there'll be a role for all stakeholders, including the media, that because we have had 5 very difficult years where Fine Gael and Labour have allowed now this country actually to have some choices, that all persons elected to this 32nd Dáil can have a role in how those choices, how that new spending.
That's not by design, though. That's just the election result that you got.
Well, no, that's not fair. That's not fair. I mean, you can't say that where we're at today in Ireland is not by design. It has been a very, very difficult.
Nobody predicted this fragmented election result, Darren. I'm sure you would have preferred to have a majority or to have Labour back in with you and the status quo continued.
We would have preferred certainly to have that.
But I know, but don't then pretend that you designed this situation
I'm
where
saying
everybody would have a say, because that's not what you wanted. That's not what you were selling.
No, that's not what I said either, or that's certainly not what I meant to say. What I'm saying is the position this country is happily now in did not happen by accident.
Everyone's happy with this.
We have to look forward now, given the numbers that the Irish people have decided at the last general election, and I don't think they want to be asked to decide again. And my point simply is that all parties, whether they have to date engaged responsibly, as we, Fianna Fáil, and many of the independents have, there will be a role, I think, for all elected members in the next Dáil to play a greater role.
Kieran Lynch is beside you there. Kieran, you wanted to come in there.
Yes, Claire, I think we need to actually take stock of what's actually happening at the moment, and Brian Dowling gave some insight of that. What we actually have 2 months after the general election is a 3-page draft document, not a programme for government. What in effect we're heading towards next week is in effect actually 2 governments, one a minority government in which Fine Gael and some partners will have more votes than the rest of the government minus Fianna Fáil, and what that then in effect means is that we'll actually have a second government which will be the shadow government, the real government, the deal that will continuously go on between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael over the shelf life of the government. Now in that regard it would appear that Fine Gael are more interested in remaining in government. They're more focused upon the historic outcome of having a Taoiseach return 2 times in a row. If we are to look at political success in that terms, we then look to Bertie Ahern, where he won 3 successive elections. If that's political success, well then that's where Fine Gael are actually focusing at the moment. And then we have a very clear recipe for this disaster, where we have a crisis-driven coalition rather than a strategic plan and a stable government over a number of years. We have 2 parties jockeying for advantage in preparation for the next election, and what we will see at the first opportunity that arises, whether it's advantageous for Fianna Fáil or for Fine Gael in terms of the polls, we'll be back into a new general election cycle.
That's pretty sensible, Dan O'Brien, do you think?
Well, I think some of it is, but we could just on that point about fragmentation, if I can say, I've been warning about the risk of fragmentation and ungovernability for the past couple of years in columns, and I think that's where we are now. Not only are we in uncharted waters, but there is no parliament in the world that has the same number of independent TDs as we have. We are absolutely unique in that regard, and that makes coalition formation and cohesion very, very difficult. And we don't have other models. People point to other countries where you have fragmentation of minority governments. Sure, but they have political parties. We are absolutely unique in the number of independents we have, and that's the nature of our electoral system. Most countries have a threshold to get into Parliament. So I think that's something that could easily lead to ungovernability. And, as we were discussing before the show, how long this government will last will say an awful lot about the structure of politics in the future.
But
and it may not just be one government.
As Kieran Lynch says there, a recipe for disaster.
It could very potentially be if we find that with such a fragmented Parliament, a uniquely fragmented Parliament in the world, let's just stress that we find we cannot keep governments together, and we end up going down the sort of route of Italy, which has many, many small parties, and they constantly have governments collapsing. They famously have had one government every year for the past 70 years. Could we be more like Italy than Denmark? And people talk a lot about Denmark. I could easily see us going more like Italy and becoming effectively ungovernable.
Mm-hmm. What about the two governments theory that Kieran Lynch has? It's interesting.
I think if you look, Claire, at what is happening and assuming that this gets off the ground, there are two sets of documentation. The agreement between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael is in two parts. The first part is a broad policy agreement, a number of headings, not a programme for government, which is very detailed. So a number of broad policy areas where they have reached agreement.
So we won't fight with you on these things?
Well, assuming you deliver them.
Yeah.
And then secondary to that then, if you like, a mechanics document as to how week in, week out they would try to work a minority government, both in terms of voting arrangements, so Fianna Fáil would be free to go full vent in opposition and at the same time agree not to take the government out on financial issues or votes of confidence, assuming and providing that they are kept in the loop of any looming crises, that there's nothing catches them by surprise. But if you look, for instance, at what they have agreed, I think there's enough in that perhaps if this gets off the ground with the independents, to keep it off the ground for a while. So you're looking at broad agreement between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael on universal social charge cuts aimed at low middle income families, an extension of mortgage interest relief. It's due to end in 2017. The plan is to taper it out up to 2020. The Fianna Fáil wanted the rent supplement to be increased. That was strongly resisted by the Department of Social Protection. Instead, they've agreed increases up to 15% on a case-by-case basis, but geographically targeted. So you might see it in urban areas, but not so much in rural areas, where the most pressure is. An agreement to look at how they deal with high variable mortgage interest rates, and maybe with legislation. I think that'll be difficult. The whole issue of rural Garda stations, they've agreed to review this to allow the policing authority to review it. So they'd look at the local crime statistics, the divisional resources, the resources in a particular area, and make a judgment then on whether some stations might be brought back, others might be amalgamated. There's a €15 million fund been put aside for hospital waiting lists. Essentially what this is doing is, Fianna Fáil's policy in the general election was to reactivate the National Treatment Purchase Fund, which was a fund set up to pay for private care for people on long waiting lists. This would be targeted at those waiting longest, and my understanding is it would begin with orthopaedics. Then there's talk about looking at subventions for childcare, maybe tax credits for parents. We know about the deal on water charges. There's an agreement on a 5-year cycle of funding for health services, and this is to avoid, if possible, the whole issue of coming back with supplementary budgets, because you can't do that anymore. You're not allowed to do that anymore. And there's agreement on mental health to push ahead on a more rapid basis with the Vision for Change programme on mental health. These are bullet points. There's no detail to a lot of these. There's broad agreement. There's a commission on public sector pay. I think when we get into the working of this and the detail of this and the actual implementation of some of these and the progress,
that's where the problems will arise, right?
And then separately the independents have to do their own more detailed programme for government. On the face of it, you wouldn't see great difficulties in simply copy and pasting this deal with more detail into a programme for government, but it's when they get to the implementation of it, this is where the difficulties might come up.
Stephen Donnelly, we haven't heard from you yet, we were talking about the independents negotiating over the weekend and into Monday and really being in a strong position. It could have been you.
Yeah, it could have been us. We decided not to do that.
Any regrets?
No regrets. We'd love to have more TDs. to put us in a stronger position to be able to affect more change. Our candidates did beyond, I think, what anyone expected them to do, but obviously we still have only 3 TDs for now.
Would you be ready for an election now?
I don't think anyone would be ready for an election, mentally, physically, emotionally, financially, or anything else. I don't think anyone wants. If there's an election, I'll cry into my cereal before I head down to the office to dust off the posters.
But you still have them, like everybody else.
Absolutely, I still have them. We thought about this long and hard. Anyone who's serious about being in Parliament wants to be in government. There's a lot of things we want to do. We believe the country needs to be brought in a fundamentally different and better direction than it has been brought in for the last 5 years. So the question for us is, how do you best affect the change you want to see? What we concluded was that going into government as 3 TDs in partnership with a 50 TD Fine Gael, where there is very significant political water between us in terms of the direction we would like to take the country, that we would inevitably get some concessions, which would be good, but in return for that we would have to vote for and publicly defend a direction the country has been taken in. We fundamentally disagree.
That lovely list that Brian went through, I mean, there are lots of things on there, I would imagine, that would fit with your own agenda.
Well, we will support things that are on that list or any other list that we agree with. We'll also actively be tabling our own legislation. You see, we have to move away. Irish politics, Dan talks about us being unique in terms of the number of independents we have, and he's right. We're also unique in the powerlessness of Parliament. So political scientists would say that Ireland has the weakest Parliament in the democratic world. And that's because we've had this historic winner-takes-all gig that says, well, we have 51% plus of the TD seats. So for the next 5 years, everything that we want to happen is going to happen.
But that's changing now.
And nothing that you want to happen is happening. No, you see, this is exactly the point, John. You're reinforcing the old world. If I could finish, John,
sure,
sorry.
Absolutely, yeah.
What we are opting into is a type of politics that says you are in Parliament. So regardless of whether you are in government or whether you are not in government, you are in Parliament and you have a democratic mandate, you have a voice, and you should, and there is an onus on you to table legislation to work with Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, whoever. So that's what we will be doing. We are talking to the parties.
Did you reason that we have as much influence not being part of that minority government?
Our conclusion is that we have more ability to affect change by being very constructive members of the Dáil. So, if Fine Gael tables legislation that we agree with, not only will we vote for it, we will work with Fine Gael to improve it as we... If Fianna Fáil table legislation that we will agree with, we will work with Fianna Fáil. And we would hope that if and when we table legislation that John agrees with or that Dara agrees with, that they will work with us. That's the way Parliament is meant to work.
What do you think of that, John?
Well, I think the Social Democrats didn't even get out of first base with this. They had an opportunity. You would have campaigned for change, and there was an opportunity to replace Enda Kenny as Taoiseach, and I don't think the Soc Dems even produced a serious detailed position paper in any of their discussions with my own party. But on the general point, I think you're being quite...
Sorry, John. I'm the one... No. Sorry. I'm the one...
I did stop when
I'm the one who negotiated with your party, right?
But there was no
you were not in meetings between Fianna Fáil and Soc Dems.
Did you produce serious detailed policy papers?
Yes, we did, as did your party, okay? Yeah. So as the person who was at the meeting...
But aside of that...
No, John, anyway, as the person who was at the meeting, yes, we did.
I think, just in a general point, Claire, you're actually... I think Brian Dowling has struck probably the right tenor. If we look through what's happening now, through the prism of the past, there's a whole load of reasons why it's not going to work. Successful minority governments, and there have been many unsuccessful ones, I accept that. The unsuccessful ones have often been led by prime ministers who were just waiting to get the next majority at the next election, who didn't recognise maybe the political reality that had happened. But successful minority governments are led by Prime Ministers, Taoiseach in this case, possibly this week, who recognise that they have to reach out, not just in a once-for-all scenario, in other words, with documents or with the initial process, but on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. And so this is allied very much with, we'll say, the work that's been going on in terms of Dáil reform, the introduction of the independent budget office, the introduction of the independent legal counsel, having a business committee for the Dáil. So in other words, the government chief whip doesn't order the Dáil's business every week.
It just sounds like it's going to be really hard to get anything done.
Do you know what? It is going to be tough, but I think we need to be an awful lot more upbeat about it, because this is the reality that we're facing. And if we go back to the country, whether it's in a week or in 6 months or in 2 years, there's a likelihood that the kind of numbers we're facing now, and this is why I made the point about what Michael McGrath said yesterday, about having put in place a decent framework for how minority governments, this one might work and minority governments may work in the future. This is very challenging.
But you're all saying, isn't this marvellous? None of you would have wanted this option if it was presented to you before the election.
Well, as a new TD, actually, it's all I know. And from that perspective, I actually find it... If I can just finish this point,
it really doesn't matter what we wanted before the election. The reality is that the people of this country made a democratic choice. I think most commentators and most politicians accept if we went back to the people of this country next month in another general election, the numbers would not change significantly, and we'll be just back. We don't, but I think there is a view, I think it is shared, that the numbers would be broadly similar. I just want to address one point that Stephen Donnelly, the Social Democrats, and Sinn Féin, the two parties that have decided to opt out of the first part of the process, which is government formation, and I hope they will take part in the next process, which is engaging in Parliament. It's this concept that they've some sort of monopoly on social justice. Our party in Fine Gael has always been founded in trying to do the best we can for the Irish people, and I think that's shared by everybody who's been elected. But you do not have choices. There was no better direction for this country 5 years ago.
Okay.
And now
in
we
your
are in a
opinion, obviously you and I would fundamentally disagree with that statement.
Where we have choices we can make with respect to families, our health system, our housing system, and I think that's why this new type of government, and there was mention by Dan about Italy, and that's fair comment, but you must also look at Finland, Denmark and other Scandinavian countries where many parties have shared in coalition, and indeed minority governments have worked.
All right.
And I think the Irish people want us to be positive.
I'm just going to stop.
For the next number of months.
Briefly, Kieran, we need to take a break.
In that, what we're getting here is another Irish solution to an Irish problem. What has been put in place here is not remotely similar to minority governments across the European Union. I welcome many of the reforms there, such as the Budget Office. It was a key recommendation of the Bank and Inquiry report. But the structure of what we're getting is a two-government model. Is one in which you actually have a minority government and we have a real shadow government of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael.
That is correct. But what's your alternative?
And if I could take one single issue, such as the Commission to deal with the public sector pay, that is going to run into very, very significant difficulties. And I don't know why we actually even have a commission. To deal with the public sector was very, very simple. Fianna Fáil, on two occasions through the Croke Park Agreement, reduced public sector incomes. The Haddington Row Agreement that was dealt with by Brendan Howland was an arrangement by which there would be a reduction in conditions, but as the economy recovered, public sector workers would see that money returned. That was the deal. It was not to set up a commission. And now what we see is a situation with two governments in place. Who do the public sector workers actually deal with? Do they deal with the minority government, or do they deal with Fine Gael and the Fianna Fáil coalition that's taking place behind the scenes? This is not only a recipe for disaster, it's a recipe for chaos.
Okay, look, I'm going to stop you there. All right, we'll come back to that in just a moment. I need to take a break, and Brian Dowling, you need to go back to your day job, I understand. Is that right?
I might
Are you happy to stay for a few minutes?
Another few minutes.
Great, okay, quick break, back with more after this. Ciarán Lynch, I want to come back to you on the point you were making about the Public Sector Pay Commission, which looks as though it may be in there. Irish Water, another issue which I would imagine hit you very badly in the election. What do you think? I mean, are you kicking yourself because Labour didn't push it enough over the lifetime of the last government, or do you just feel betrayed by Fine Gael?
Way back in June 2012, as chairperson of the Environment Committee, I published a very, very substantial report on the future of the Irish water services in this country. We made a number of recommendations at that time, particularly in regard to public ownership and the requirement for a waiver system. I think we have to decouple the issue of what is the charge and what is the actual infrastructural investment that's required in Irish water over the next decade.
Before we get down to the specifics, just when you see this deal being done, where there are compromises being made on subjects that Labour just had to swallow?
Well, I think I always look, when a decision is made, I look at what the outcome will be, and the outcome of the decision that's been made at the moment, asks a very, very big question. There's approximately 5 billion to 10 billion required.
No, you're still going down that road. I want you to talk to me about what you feel when you hear that rent allowance is going to be increased, for example, something that Labour wanted done and weren't allowed to do.
Well, rent allowance actually was dealt with by the previous government, and it was dealt with on a case-by-case basis. I welcome that there's more money now in the Exchequer, and that case-by-case basis can become more benign. What was never suggested, and I don't think it's been suggested even now, is that there would be a blanket increase right across the rental support sector. If that were to actually happen, it would further add to rent inflation.
So you don't feel that you lost your seat and then Fine Gael come back and they start cutting deals with people whereby they're changing policy, where they fundamentally had set red lines all over the place when you were in government with them and wouldn't budge. Now they're moving and you've lost your seat.
And the reason why they're moving is because they are now dealing with Fianna Fáil, and we're retracting back to a situation that we probably last seen in 1977, where every decision is being made in the context of the present. Every decision is being dealt with in terms of being politically advantageous in the right here and now, and we have a situation whereby the consequences of decisions such as the infrastructure requirements for Irish Water over the next 10 years, the bill hasn't gone away. Even if the bill is being suspended, the requirements to invest in public water service in this country remains, and it costs billions of euros. If we abolish the utility, it means that about approximately 5 to 10 billion euros come onto the public balance sheet over the next couple of years. The type of space that was there up to now to invest in childcare services, to give modest income earners a break in USC and in other areas get affected by that. So what we're actually seeing is the expediency of the arrangement between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, unwinding some of the very, very good work that was done with Fine Gael in government with the Labour Party over the last number of years.
You could have won concessions in these areas if you'd been more forceful while in government with Fine Gael.
Well, I think you have to look at the 5-year cycle of the government. When we came into office 5 years ago, there was no money whatsoever, and what money we were getting was coming from the Troika. We managed over the 5 years to get ourselves out of the Troika programme and to put growth into this into this economy. The decisions or the space that is now there in terms of these finances to be able to do a better job in government is as a result of the last 5 years, and the Labour Party was very, very clear at the general election as to how it was actually going to spend this money.
But you paid the price.
Oh, there's no question that the election had huge consequences for the Labour Party and was a major setback for us, and we were very, very aware of that when we went into government 5 years ago, that the job of work that was required to be done at that time was going to have implications at the ballot box next time out.
Will you try again, Kieran? Would you go again for election?
Well, I just answered the first question of that first. It all depends on how you define political success. If political success is winning election after election, well then Bertie Ahern is the champion of politics in this country. If it's about actually getting the country back from the brink of disaster, getting people back to work and developing some growth in this economy, the Labour Party was very, very successful. In regards to myself, I've always been passionately involved in politics, and I will continue to do so. And I was at a meeting of the Labour Party this week where I see the energy for the Labour Party there for the future, and I will continue to be involved in politics.
OK, so if there's another election, you will run. Dara Murphy is beside you there, Fine Gael, as we were saying before the break. Do you agree with what Leo Varadkar said during the week, that the decision on Irish Water is not in the public interest? It was ridiculous for Fianna Fáil to push it, and that the party wanted to extract an embarrassing concession from Fine Gael?
Well, I agree certainly that our position before the election, during the campaign, and subsequently that we needed to ensure that the water utility was maintained, that the utility that would allow us to protect a secure, stable water supply for generations would be kept in place. We have a disagreement with Fianna Fáil and other parties about the term of the suspension of charges, and there was compromise in that regard. And I think
they won, though, didn't they?
Well, I mean, they wanted Irish Water abolished, and I think we have to, if we're going to change politics in Ireland, we have to move away from winners and losers. I think there was a compromise between the two parties, and now there will be an opportunity over the next 6 or 7, 9 months to discuss how the concept that people who conserve water are allowed benefit from that fact over and above people who perhaps waste it.
Do you
That's
think that
done in
Fianna
an
Fáil wanted
affordable
to
way for
extract
people.
an embarrassing concession from Fine Gael?
Well, Fianna Fáil had their position that they went into the general election on. They had 2 positions on water. We had 2 positions on water.
Was it an embarrassing concession, Dara? That's my question.
No, I don't believe it was.
So you don't agree with Leo Varadkar?
Well, I'll tell you what I do believe. I do believe in the principle, that people, should pay taxes based on their income, that there should be a system of property taxes, and also there should be some provision for polluter pays when it comes to water. And I think that that's a position shared in Dáil Éireann by some or many of the independents. It's shared by the Labour Party, by Fine Gael and by the Green Party. And while Fianna Fáil even did campaign that water charges would be suspended, I think the core principle, a legally binding principle, remains. And we want to work now with experts within the Dáil Committee to make that argument and to show that if people do not pay a modest charge for water, they will have to pay it in other ways. I think the point
general taxation.
Through other taxes, yes, absolutely. And I think the point that Leo was making, was that there are other issues that are very important for the people of this country, more important issues, I have to say. And I know that some independents in particular, and Sinn Féin, are saying that this general election was fought on Irish water. It certainly wasn't only fought on Irish water. In fact, for me and for many other politicians, issues such as housing, healthcare and other issues were more prominent. And I think that they have been addressed, I think, to be fair, in the agreement
Stephen,
with Fianna Fáil, and will continue to be addressed now
Stephen Donnelly wants to
with the independents over the next number of days.
Yeah, I think we got a fudge on Irish water, and I think it is an acceptable fudge. We were potentially faced with the 32nd Dáil collapsing over water charges. Yes, it's important. Yes, there's a certain number of people who are very exercised about it for very good reasons. Irish water is not just about Irish water. It became a lightning rod for a tone, for an arrogance, for essentially a government that was bullying people.
You don't believe in the user pays, do you? When it comes to water,
I don't disagree with the concept of user pays. We do it for electricity. We do it for a bunch of things. The water charging regime that was
there's a
implemented
change in
by Fine
policy
Gael
for you there now from the Social Democrats, I think.
It's not at all. The water charging regime that was implemented was such that the amount of money raised covered the cost of collecting the money. So none of the water being raised was actually being used to run the water system or upgrade the system or so forth. But they have reached a fudge, and that's okay, because there are more important things than water. We have a homelessness crisis. We still have a mortgage crisis. We have 1 in 9 children in the country living in daily poverty. And the reality is that neither Fine Gael nor Fianna Fáil's position on water was tenable. Fianna Fáil are trying to rewrite their campaign. They did not campaign on suspending water charges. They campaigned on ending water charges. The word in all of their literature is end. So just to be clear, that's what Fianna Fáil campaigned on.
It was end for the period of government. It was to end for the term of government.
So
but it was to end for the term of government.
End for the term of government. But critically, Fianna Fáil are looking to take a national utility, which is a good idea, and put it back into the 34 local authorities. That's stark raving mad. And Fine Gael were right to refuse that.
This is going to be examined by a commission.
And secondly, Fine Gael's position was, we're just going to continue as is and ignore the fact that the majority of TDs were elected to the Dáil to end water charges. We have a fudge. It is an acceptable fudge because we need to get on with doing the business.
Can I just bring Dan O'Brien in here?
There's a real risk that we get into a situation where unpopular decisions are not taken, populist decisions are taken, and because the government is so weak and there are so many vested interests and it's so dependent on so many other people that no difficult things get done.
See, John would accuse you of being pessimistic about this.
Well, I'm saying this is let me take one thing
that water was
causes. Yes, I agree. Water is an extraordinary phenomenon. But let's take the issue of this increase in rent allowance. Now, the Department of Social Protection has said this is not a good idea. Why? If you increase by up to 15%, according to reports, if you increase the amount for rental allowance, you might as well write cheques with taxpayers' money to private landlords.
Yeah, but rent allowance is set at recession rates.
If you have a fixed, imagine you had 5 chocolate bars here and we've got locked in here for 24 hours. We'd all take out the cash we have on us and we'd pay you for those chocolate bars. Now, if the producer came in and gave us all €100, the price that we pay you for those chocolate bars would soar. Would we have any more chocolate bars? No, we wouldn't. the price would go up. Now, that's what the government is doing. My view is that any money that we have available for housing goes on increasing the supply, either by the government directly building homes or by leveraging the money to get
And in the
private
meantime,
supply
do you
going.
keep families in hotels for 3 to 5 years?
Or force them out of a home because they can't
increasing
pay
the
the rent.
rent allowance will simply amount to giving money to private landlords because rents will go up.
It will, Dan, but it will. You're right. I mean, from a pure kind of desktop economic analysis, that is true. But as TDs, with people coming in every day saying, we have just been thrown out of our house. These are my two children.
I think, Claire, there's a very important.
There is a short-term solution, which is increased rent.
If the supply doesn't increase, the prices will simply go up. Why not use the hundreds of millions that you would spend on increasing rental allowance to build those houses and build them quickly?
Because in the short, so you're right. I absolutely agree. We need to increase the housing supply, and I don't think anyone elected to Dáil Éireann would disagree with you. But there is a very short-term, immediate homelessness crisis that has to be dealt with.
Okay, but the issue here is one of the other things that's been come out apparently is that the mortgage interest relief thing is going to stay. Now, as Kevin Doyle and John Downing report today, that's going to cost $850 million. Now, if that money was used to build houses, that would address the problem. Instead, if this happens and the mortgage interest relief doesn't go, what are you talking about? You're talking about helping people who are already in homes with mortgages who own their own homes. Now, that's an example.
Is that part of the Fianna Fáil deal?
This is the Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael deal. Now, the risk, what I'm saying is there's a risk with a government like this that governments help do this sort of populist thing and don't do the harder things.
All right, Darragh Murphy wants to come in there. Darragh, I think you wanted to come in on the rent allowance. Was that where we were starting?
On the broader point, I suppose the OECD references the Action Plan for Jobs as one of the most successful initiatives taken by a government. And I think, Fine Gael proposal that has come out over the last number of weeks has been an action plan for housing. And I think, we sometimes can be very critical of ourselves in this country. And the new Dáil, I believe, can have a hugely inclusive role now in bringing in stakeholders and going through
the point. Raising
rent
raising rent allowance by 15%. Good idea or bad idea? And if it is such a good idea, why didn't you do it before now?
Well, look, I mean, as I understand it, that it hasn't been agreed across the board that rent allowance, will be increased by 15%, and I haven't seen the specific proposals. I mean, I know there will be an encouragement to help transition people into the housing assistance payment, but I mean, there is a broader point here that we have a multifaceted housing crisis in this country and homelessness crisis, which can be dealt with, I think, if we apply the same approach that we did with respect to the Action Plan for Jobs. And it's a supply issue, it's a building issue, it's a private sector issue, and of course it's working with stakeholders and local authorities. And I mean, the exact specific detail about that around rent supplement and the percentages, I haven't been privy to the discussion.
But do you have a personal opinion on it?
It is. Well, I can certainly see the argument about the money that would go straight towards landlords, and I think that we are going to have to design a system where that we don't, accelerate or I suppose overly ignite what is already a very inflationary housing market, particularly in the larger cities of Dublin and Cork.
Sorry, John,
there is the broader point, however, that by piece, action by action, measure by measure, that we have the capacity in this country to address our housing crisis quickly.
I don't know whether it is I know it has been speculated in the paper, but what Dan will appreciate too is that there are people throughout the country, in my own constituency, who are being faced today, last week, last month, and will be in a month's time with rent increases which will force them out of their family home. And so if it is to be included in a document of agreement as a temporary measure, as a
matter of fact, what Dan would you do with those people?
Well, what I'm saying is that you use the money. There's a limited amount of money. You use the money to build the short term. So there was this.
Somebody is being kicked out today. Today, do you give them more rent allowance, or do you say no? Hang on till we build the house for 3 years?
Okay, first of all, the government has intervened in the rental market to prevent landlords from increasing rents already. So there's already been a cap introduced.
Exactly, which makes the increase in rent allowance, if it's suggested, a sensible short-term measure.
So you keep doing more and more short-term measures. If there's a few hundred million there, get it into building. There was this notion of these short-term, these prefabricated, quick-build homes.
Yeah.
Get focused on using the hundreds of millions to get people into those homes. Don't use it where it will effectively be a taxpayer's cheque going to landlords.
It will to a point, Dan, but I just want to reiterate, your medium to long-term theory on that is absolutely correct. But we are all dealing with mums and dads who are coming into our offices with their 2- and 3-year-old kids saying, which B&B am I going to have to raise my kids in? If I'm lucky, I get into a B&B or a hotel, and if I don't, I end up in an unsecure, wet and dry homeless hostel somewhere. Like, that's the reality on the ground.
I thought we agreed that the rent had been capped. Rent increases have been capped. Have we not? This is a measure already that has already been taken.
Clear.
Can I just...
I think Kieran, we haven't heard from Kieran Lynch on this yet.
I think it's very, for anybody who's actually in that difficulty right here and now, it's important that they understand there is a system in place and it's dealt with on a case-by-case basis. People go to their community welfare officer if they are in danger of actually losing
not working.
No, there actually is, and the figures actually, the Department of Social Welfare actually demonstrate that on a case-by-case basis, when families or individuals are presenting themselves to the community welfare officer because of rent inflation, they're in danger of losing their homes, the individual cases are being dealt with.
I know, but if that was working, Kieran, we wouldn't have families going to people like Stephen.
I can see, I certainly would agree with Stephen at this point, but it's dealing with the issue on a case-by-case basis. What Dan O'Brien is right in this regard, if there is a blanket increase in rent supplement provision, all that will happen is that rents will go up by 15% for that sector. Again, that has a knock-on effect to people who do not qualify for rent supplement because they're working, but their wages...
I thought Labour were in favour of increasing the rent supplement. I think I distinctly remember Alan Kelly putting it forward.
And there has been movement actually on the rent supplement, but if you go back to the bad old days of Fianna Fáil, there was €1 billion a year going into rent supplement in this country. That's money going straight into the pockets of landlords. Do we want to revisit that day again, where instead of investing in social housing, instead of investing in opportunities to allow working people to buy their homes, that the greater proportion of the social housing budget is actually going into subsidised private rental situations? It has to be dealt with on a case-by-case
basis. All right,
basis.
I need to take another quick break. Back with more after this.
Last Sunday, April 24th, was Census Night, and every home should now have completed a census form. If you still need a census form, please free text the word FORM to 50400. Visit our help desk at census.ie or local 1850 20 1604. Census 2016. Make your mark.
Hi, I'm Claire. I took out my home insurance with FBD and got 2 months free, which is really great value, especially in the event of, say, damage from burst pipes or a storm, or like robbers breaking in and stealing all your stuff. Well, anyway, the good news, of course, is 2 months free home insurance with FBD. No big deal, just a good deal.
Is your insurance up? Call us today on 1890 617 617 or visit fbd.ie. Offer ends 30th of June 2016. Save 16.7% for new policies only, excluding renewals. Cannot be used with another offer. Terms, conditions and normal underwriting criteria apply. FBD Insurance plc is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
There is one company in Ireland as diverse as the thousands of communities they serve. A company that already powers over 100,000 Irish homes with green energy. That turns organic materials into renewable fuel. Even converts household rubbish into electricity. A company born of the land that rehabilitates and preserves that land. The name of that company? Bord na Móna. To ensure a sustainable future is not just an ideal, but a reality. Bord na Móna. Naturally driven.
What's the smart way to see North America for less? You could stay at home watching movies. Or go to aerlingus.com right now and get €100 off return flights to North America. Choose from all our direct routes, now including Los Angeles, Hartford, Connecticut and Newark. Save money today, and with US Customs pre-clearance, save time when you're travelling. Smart gets a great big blockbuster of a North American deal. Smart flies Aer Lingus. Book now at aerlingus.com. Offer subject to conditions and availability.
I'm disgusted with Fianna Fáil supporting Enda being Taoiseach and their breaking of their Irish water promise. I'm glad I resisted giving them a vote. John Lahart, that's from a fan.
Yeah, obviously.
Listening.
We didn't, we spent the first 3 weeks of the new Dáil reaching out to independents, getting particular positive vibes from some of the independents that the possibility of a minority Fianna Fáil government led by Micheál Martin was possible. That couldn't go on indefinitely. We had, campaigned on principle of wanting to bring about change. We then, had Micheál's name had been put to the Dáil on 3 occasions, and we hadn't gained one additional vote. So we're not putting, Fine Gael back in government in the way that they went to the country in government. This is completely different. This is going to be a government that has to actually enter into a partnership with Parliament, and it's never happened before. We did our best. We reached out to Stephen and his party. There simply was no response. That couldn't go on indefinitely. We moved really quickly, to avoid another general election or endless.
Social Democrats are entitled to
absolutely
make their own minds up.
One of the key things we did, we moved immediately to say, look, okay, we'll now do one of the things that's left to us, which is to try and facilitate a minority government for the country.
Okay, I just want to move.
We could have been irresponsible. Just on the Irish water thing, one of the things I want to say is this, unlike some of the other parties, I suppose it took us a few weeks to lead Fine Gael to the position that, look, there are 90 TDs in the Parliament.
Okay, don't be bragging now about the win.
No, but
we know it's no water charges for the lifetime
Claire,
of
I don't see
government.
this in terms of winning and losing, and I would say, actually, I'd appeal to the media. No, actually you do, evidently. I would appeal to the media. There's a requirement for people's outlook to change in relation to government and Parliament in Ireland. There's a requirement on government to make changes in how they do government. There's a requirement now for an end to no consequence opposition.
All right, I've only got a few minutes left. I'm not going to let you talk about Irish water for the next couple of minutes,
because there's also a requirement on media not to see parliamentary and government always in turns.
John, you're not going to come in here and tell me my job. I know what this election was fought on, and I sat through the entire campaign.
That's fine.
I've sat through 9 weeks of negotiations.
But we're in a completely
I've heard
different
politicians
situation.
bringing up Irish water at every twist and turn.
Claire,
so it is an issue, and it was a win for Fianna Fáil.
Do you know what, actually, we're after completely diffusing it now. We're after actually parking it and saying, look, let's pause.
All right, and
let's see how
Can we talk about public sector pay? Because Dan O'Brien, I know that you wanted to address this. Ciarán Lynch talked about it earlier. He said we have a pay agreement. It's called Haddington Road, and yet we see now quite possibly a commission to examine pay levels across the public sector. Good idea?
Yes. If it's like the UK model, which has worked pretty well over the years, which is transparent, open, run by independent people, then it is a really potentially very good idea. Let's recall that in the 8 years up to 2008, public sector pay bill in this country rose by 138%. That was the fastest in the Eurozone. It was 4 times higher than the average. It was bigger even than Greece, where interest groups are extremely powerful. If that had not happened, things would have been a lot easier for everyone. There would have been a lot less austerity. It is vital that the people who shout loudest and have the most power and influence over government do not use that power to grab most resources. Let's also make a point that's not well known.
All right, but Guard's starting salary, 23 grand. These people have taken a big hit.
Well, hang on. When the recruitment for new Guards came in, there was a massive the numbers of people applying were enormous. Now, people knew the pay rate, and massive numbers of people applied. What does that say? Now,
that we've got an unemployment problem.
I think what's very important coming out of what we're hearing from the agreement is that Fianna Fáil are going to support the Lansdowne agreement. That was very important for Fine Gael, just like we convinced them to support Irish Water, the utility, which was vitally important as well. So both sides have shown the capacity to listen to the arguments of others. But we do need to be careful, and I think the Commission on Public Sector Pay will be very important, as has been the Lansdowne agreement, that public sector pay issues do not come to a point where they destabilise the position that this country is now in, and I think that will be also a very important point over the next couple of years.
Public sector workers who have honoured their side of the agreement, listening into the show today, must be horrified. The deal was very, very simple. It was that as the economy continued to grow, that there would be a restoration and an unwinding of Haddington Road. Brendan Howlin, as Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, has put into budgetary measures in the very, very last budget that would see public sector workers get some restoration between now and the end of 2017, and a continuation of those negotiations on that programme. Any public sector worker, Darren, let me finish this point. The question every public sector worker should be asking them now, in the same way as Irish Water, does this commission mean that current restoration of pay is going to be suspended?
Okay.
I think both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael need to answer that question.
Unfortunately, we've got to go. We're out of time. I know we could continue. Thank you all very much. Ciarán Lynch and Darragh Murphy in Cork, John Lahart, Stephen Donnelly and Dan O'Brien, and also my thanks to Brian Dowling, who was here earlier. And Brian will be presenting the programme next week. Enjoy the bank holiday weekend and thank you for listening.